Hey, Aly, again, thank you so much for joining us on continuing the conversation. Before we dive in, you want to go ahead and let the people know who you are, where you're from?
Absolutely. Hi, Erin. It's really just great to be here. I'm Aly Richards. I'm the CEO of Let's Grow Kids. Excited to talk more about the work we're doing in Vermont. Really, we're a campaign to end Vermont's childcare crisis by 2025. And I have been here at Let's Grow Kids for 9 years. And in that time, I ended up having some twins. I have identical twin 5-year-old boys who are actually starting kindergarten in a couple of weeks. So this is what I knew I wanted to spend my career on, and then it got deeply personal along the way. Background in policy and politics that actually has lent itself really well here. I live in Montpelier with my family, which is the state capital, and just excited to be in community with you and share the work.
Absolutely. I mean, twins, we could have a whole podcast just about that. I've got a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. I can't imagine being a first-time parent, but just like double at the same time. So
It prepares you for pretty much anything. So
I would
yes,
say
it's
you're just
great
completely
leadership.
unfazed. Yeah.
Well, no, they joke about it in Vermont. Let's grow kids. I guess we take it a little too seriously. I'm not the only one on the team that has twins either. So,
Oh,
just trying
wow.
to be
Okay.
efficient.
Something in the water in Vermont. Aly, before we talk about Let's Grow Kids, the ways that you've engaged the business community, I think it might be helpful for those of us who are a little bit less initiated in the nuances of New England. For example, I constantly get Vermont, New Hampshire confused. Sorry about that. But I was wondering if you could just like paint us a little picture of like the state of Vermont, maybe the demographics, and how that influences your work on childcare policy.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're quite different from New Hampshire. So we only have 650,000 people in the entire state. And we actually have an incredibly aging demographic, which is a major, major challenge for us and other rural places that I think you would see across this country. This is something we have to focus on, I would say, collectively, because that aging demographic is affecting our affordability, economic opportunity. And we really have to get ahead of this before we become not viable as communities, as rural states. So those are a couple of reasons, by the way, why childcare is so important and so urgent right now, because it's one of those few solutions that actually has this profound impact on all the things that actually impact our demographics here, including our aging, workforce and shrinking population. But we're very rural. We have deep pockets of poverty. We also see extreme diversity in certain areas. Up in Burlington, we have over 50 languages spoken in the school district. So I think there are, another key aspect of Vermont is that we just really are a close-knit community. We believe deeply in community. We're one phone call away from the governor, to business leaders, to healthcare leaders, and we're all sort of very much involved. And I frankly think this is an advantage, because what we are able to do on childcare in Vermont is very transferable in a couple ways, right? Like, let us use our small population and our sort of community mindset to do the work, to prove the concept, and then we can transfer our strategies to any sector, to any other demographic, to any other state. And then we can also be sort of the aspirational model, right? Wait a minute, Vermont did what? And what happened, right? Like, so childcare work has progressed and the economy has strengthened. You see higher numbers, labor force, right? So I really think while we are small and those demographics do affect us and our ability maybe to move quicker on things, we still have a sort of aspirational and potential example model that we can set here. And the last thing I'll say is just for ideology, right? We'll get into this probably a bit, but childcare is a very bipartisan issue. We're seeing that in Vermont. We have a very a moderate and very popular Republican governor, and we have a super majority of Dems in our legislature. And so anyway, a couple more factors just to give you some fodder for painting the picture of who we are up here.
No, that's super helpful context. And so I was thinking that we could sort of start at the end and work backwards a little bit when it comes specifically to some of the innovations that Vermont has come up with in terms of public-private partnerships and childcare funding. And so what was it, about a year ago that Act 76 passed? I remember seeing the pictures of everybody like gathered outside the Capitol and the signs and everybody cheering. So it was passed about a year ago, and then officially the implementation kicked off just July 1st of this year, correct?
No, it actually last
No.
year it's been phased in. So we had a
Okay.
couple of things in this July that just began. For
Got it.
example, expanding the benefit of childcare financial assistance to non-U.S. citizens, right? So very important thing for our economy and other aspects, and increasing reimbursement rates to home childcare, so family childcare homes, which is an incredibly important part of the childcare system, especially in a rural place. So we actually cut in half the difference in reimbursement, so finances from the state to those home settings as opposed to the center. So just an example of we phased in the implementation. Those things just started in July, but everything else started last year, right as soon as the ink was dry.
Okay. No, that's super helpful because I saw the articles about like July 1st. This starts. So
Yeah.
let's start at the beginning for the uninitiated. So let's start with what is Act 76, and then how did you? And I think this is, I mean, all of it's fascinating, but for me, this is the most interesting part. So how did you come up with Act 76, and then what was the plan to bring in? You talked about the community aspect of Vermont. So how did you come up with Act 76, and how did you get such a diverse set of stakeholders on board?
Ooh, that's a great question. And how can I distill, a decade of on the ground, right, organizing work into a succinct thing? But I'll do my best. Basically, the high points, Aaron, are we are really a campaign to end Vermont's childcare crisis, as I said, by 2025. We actually set a goal as concrete as you could get. What is the most ambitious but achievable goal that we can accomplish here in Vermont? And in what reasonable time frame? And we actually went ahead. It's very sort of an entrepreneurial group of people using entrepreneurial tactics said, let's keep the focus. Let's push the amount of effort that is necessary for the size of the transformation and the change and the benefit, towards this. And let's put a time frame that's actually reasonable, ambitious but achievable, right? So, that which led to incredible urgency and accountability and focus. So our goal is that every Vermonter who needs it has access to childcare, that it's quality, and the main measure there is the early educator, the support and level of preparation and compensation of that educator. Like any other sector, this is how it works. That's a key proxy for quality and also access, because you need those educators in the room to do the work. And then affordability, that no family pays more than 10% of their income. So we sort of set these goals as a community. We did a Blue Ribbon Commission a decade ago. How do we define access, affordability, equality? We've been on the ground in various iterations, human to human organizing, to big groups, to big summits, for many years, refining our goals together, doubling down on those goals together. So we've just been holding those goals at Let's Grow Kids as a campaign and moving them forward. So basically, we've been on the ground doing people, policy, and programs, right? So I mentioned we have 650,000 people in Vermont. 40,000 of those, pretty big percentage of the whole, are actively engaged in this campaign and have been for some time, which means they're sharing their stories, they're talking to legislators, they're building up, elevating the issue in their community. So people power, you build the political will to pass policy, which brings me to the other piece, right? Childcare is a broken business model. The financing of it is wrong. Early educators can afford to make less, families can afford to pay more, and they're the only payer, right? So that's a broken model. And so you need public investment. And that's what we sort of coalesce. Nobody wants to raise revenue, right? But if that's the solution to something, oh, and by the way, it ends up paying for itself. That's what happened in Vermont. We studied the issue together. We heard from those most involved for a long time. I really want to underscore patience here, right? And we had that level of focus. And so then we had programs. So we were actually on the ground with early educators on our team, in communities, understanding the weaknesses and the opportunities, trying to fix some of those with what we could to ready the system for investment, right? So you have to have the policy change to make the investment to fix this issue. So you got to write that policy together. And then, we're seeing great success already in the implementation. Over 1,000 new childcare spaces, wages going up for early educators, operational models becoming stabilized. Here's one way to put it, Aaron, in the implementation. It's working already. And it's been, less than a year in a lot of these pieces. We actually saw more childcare programs open than close in the first quarter of this year. For the first time since we started measuring that data 6 years ago. Okay. So that just shows you the depth of the crisis, and it shows you we're wrangling it, right? Because of the passage of this bill. So that's sort of how we got to where we got. People, policy, programs, very concerted effort, keeping the focus. But then I will say, what is Act 76? It creates the first of its kind sustainable public revenue that allows us to do all these things. It allows us to make childcare more affordable for thousands of Vermont families. It makes it higher quality because you're actually paying these wages, supporting this workforce, and you're seeing access improve because you actually have enough money to make it work. So many other little details, but that's sort of in summary what we were able to do here. And as I say, it's working already, which is really motivating, really galvanizing. Anyway, that's a snapshot for you. I'm sure we'll get into the business piece too, but we have many lessons learned. And one of them is when you're in this environment where money is a big part of the solution, whether you like it or not, the business community becomes paramount, and we would not be where we are today in Vermont without the business leadership. And they just weren't engaged. They were actually leading, and so happy to talk more about any of these details with you.
No, absolutely. And so you said people, policy, programs, and then it sounds like patience as well is sort of that fourth alliterative P. So we've got Act 76, 0.44% payroll tax.
That's right.
Big community effort, and included in that community. And I think that in some situations, this is sort of a glaring omission, but included in that community of understanding the issue, being engaged on the issue, and then contributing at the ground level to part of the solution is that business community, right? And so I think that for our audience, it would be incredibly helpful just to hear sort of how you engaged, like how did you, sort of, and I know it's like a 10-year thing, and so sorry to ask you, 10-year questions in a 1-minute format, but how did you as a childcare advocate, get providers, other ECE policy experts, and the business community sort of at the table talking about solutions that made sense to all of them, and then so that sort of like level setting, and then from there activating that into a campaign. So I guess to put it shorter, going from, hey, we have some ideas to, okay, let's take this idea and put it into action.
You got it. I mean, as you can sort of see at Let's Grow Kids, we were able to be this one-stop shop where we're sort of one part think tank, one part organizer, one part catalyst, one part just keep the drumbeat going and the focus and hold the coalition together. But the power was in the partners, the power was in the leadership. And so, as I mentioned earlier, businesses have a critical role to play in solving the childcare crisis. In Vermont, it played out. In this country, I believe it deeply. Our strategy of creating a long-term sustainable public investment wasn't just informed by the business community here, it was really led by them. And, that's because businesses understand this concept the most. Smart investments earn returns. And every public dollar we invest in childcare, we know this, it actually returns $3 as a bare minimum immediately, and then an additional $3 into the future. And that's just like what you can measure, tip of the iceberg stuff. And so, we're experiencing the deep, as I mentioned earlier, demographic crisis in Vermont, a workforce crisis across sectors in Vermont. We sort of had to say, what can we do here to make Vermont an affordable place? We need a stronger workforce. We need business growth. Childcare is the answer to all that. So what we were able to do is sort of, again, say, what do we care about in Vermont? A stable economy that's actually functional into the 21st century, enough workers to have economic opportunity and growth, enough taxpayers to shoulder the burdens of running a state, and so I know it's maybe not intuitive to folks, but we did a lot of community work in small groups, in individual basis, in communities, and beyond. And we coalesced around this idea. There are so few solutions to these profound, complex challenges of the 21st century. And actually, affordable access to childcare is one of those. Almost every single person has a personal connection and story to this, whether you're an employer, a grandparent, a parent, an early educator, right? And so once you connect the dots, so we elevated voices, we sort of did public education around the issue. And then I will say COVID hit. And it blew it open, right? We were prepared to take advantage of a sea change of attitudes that childcare is essential. Childcare is essential to recovery from COVID, to reopening our economy, as essential as other deep pieces of infrastructure that we've all known for many, many decades, right? And so that changing attitude was the final sort of step. So that blew the whole thing open for us and let us sort of like march through with the preparation we had done on the ground in communities and with different groups for a long time to get this done. But I just want to double down on the business thing again, right? So businesses in Vermont came in and said, we've studied this issue, and they had. And I can't emphasize enough this peer-to-peer and strategy with businesses, right? Many business leaders in Vermont from different sectors, different geographies, different genders, different size businesses came together as sort of the nuclear core of these business champions. They said, we have no choice but to fix this workforce crisis in Vermont. Access to childcare is what our employees are telling us. We see it every day. How do we fix this thing? And they studied it, and they realized one-off wasn't going to work. Systemic solutions is the only way you're going to fix infrastructure like this. So then they became the most powerful advocates with their peers and with lawmakers. And that busted the conversation open, Aaron. You have folks coming into the State House saying, I'm a business leader. I invest in my business to grow and to make money. We're asking the state of Vermont to do the same thing. We can't fix this without it. It has to be systemic. If we pay in through a payroll tax, it's a modest tax. So 0.44%, 75% is employer, 25% is employee if they choose. Many employers in Vermont, now that it's in effect, have chosen to pay the whole amount. So let's just say, for example, if you make $60,000 a year, which is a little over our median wage in Vermont, you're paying $66 a year to create a system of functional, equitable, accessible, high-quality childcare, right? Which is well outpacing the modest tax, and the benefits we're already seeing only 1 year in. So that was the value proposition they explained that only they could be the messengers for, and that's what's in fact playing out on the ground right now.
So, Aly, so many pieces of that are both incredible and fascinating. So with that 0.44% payroll tax, that was going to be one of my follow-up questions was, can you give us an example of sort of like what 25% of 0.44% would mean for an employee? So it's $66 a year if you're making $60,000 a year. And so that payroll tax, it goes into a state fund, correct? And then those funds go towards increasing teacher salary, but without increasing parent tuition. Is that a fair sort of summary?
Yes, they basically go to both relief for tuition for families through increasing who is eligible in Vermont. So by this October, the final wave of implementation goes into effect. Families making 500 who are at 575% of poverty or below. So in other words, a family of four making about $180,000 a year will be eligible for tuition assistance, basically funding that helps them afford their childcare bills. So that's a vast majority of Vermont families we've captured through this that are actually getting support by October to pay for their childcare. The same funding stream goes in to increase the reimbursement rate to the childcare provider. So it's like one funding stream. This money goes into this early education fund, and it goes out through increased eligibility through those tuition assistance for more Vermonters, and also two programs directly. They then have more money per child in their hands to actually fund the true cost of childcare, which, as we know, the biggest cost there is the wage for early educators. But there's other things too. There's rent, there's utilities, there's food programs, right? So it's basically just giving them more money to run the high quality programs, that they know their families and kids need.
Absolutely. Aly, a year in, has there been any new pushback that maybe wasn't there in the lead up to the passage of the bill? Like, now that it's been kind of rolled out and implemented, have you talked to anybody or run into any parties that are like, I don't know about this?
Well, sure. I mean, we're talking about money, and that's the hardest thing in the world. I mean, we know what kids need at the most critical time in their development, I would say, and we have not moved on it for 50 plus years. The vast majority of kids in this country who need some form of out-of-home care at this most critical time in their development, and we know what they need. It's not rocket science. It's basic stuff supporting their healthy development that will support them to have a thriving life, for the rest of their life, right? So it's sort of like, once you see it, it's sort of interesting, right? So why haven't we done it? Because it's about money. And, and so that's why we were able to have this community conversation where we said, look, we know this is a tough conversation. We're digging deep here, but it's worth it. And I have to say, Aaron, that's been amazing. So as you pass the payroll tax, yes, we're having a deep conversation about affordability in Vermont. Our property taxes are high. Our demographic challenges are scary, really scary. There's fewer taxpayers to shoulder this burden, right? So we're having an affordability, discussion in Vermont, as we should. And the payroll tax is now a piece of that puzzle. But what I have found amazing is this deep community conversation we've been able to have with diverse public and private stakeholders over many years, including the business community, we're having a more sophisticated and more effective conversation about it. So we're saying, look, got it. Vermont's not affordable today, really. It's hard to open a business. It's hard to grow. It's hard to be a young person in Vermont. It's hard to have a family in Vermont. What are we going to do about it? Yep. And that's where, again, the business community was so important, saying, look, we could just sit back and say no new taxes or fees, and Vermont will still not be affordable. No new taxes and fees, that's fine, but we aren't affordable today. We're not growing today. So what we were able to say over 10 years together, come to this conclusion together, is we're actually going to do something about it. One of the few solutions is investment in childcare will break us out of this death spiral we're in as a small rural state. We'll actually invest money so we can have young people move to Vermont. So we have the resources to allow them to grow, to make it more affordable for them to have kids, right? To be in the workforce. We're seeing people be in jobs now, and that busts the gross state product right up immediately, right? So we're having an affordability discussion that's very sophisticated, and that way I would say very effective in Vermont. And this is a piece of the puzzle. So yes, is everybody happy that we had to increase a tax? Absolutely not. But what I'm amazed at, Aaron, is since it passed and is in effect since this July 1st, people are saying, you know what? This isn't that much money. This isn't really the crux of the problem of affordability in Vermont, and I'm happy to see what it's doing on the ground for childcare. So we're going to keep doing that. Is our job as a community, and Let's Grow Kids, as we've been doing this for a long time, to make sure this works. It works the way we promised. It's working for Vermonters. It's working for our economy. It's going to the places we promised it would go. So we're on it. Accountability is critical to build that faith, build that confidence, that you can make a hard decision, but show that it's worth it.
And Aly, that's a perfect segue into my very last question. I so much appreciate your time. I know you've got just tons going on between overhauling Vermont's childcare system and also 2 5-year-olds. But I think that, we opened with, tell me a little bit about Vermont. I don't know if everybody knows a ton about Vermont specifically as a state. Sometimes I think that America sort of gets swept up into regions. You've got the Midwest, you've got the Southwest, the New England. So when you talk to either business leaders from other states or early childhood advocates from other states, and their immediate response is, well, yeah, but that's Vermont. And I don't even know what that means per se, but just I've run into that when I talk to different chambers. They're like, well, I don't know if that's going to work here. What are some of the most either replicable or sustainable lessons that you've taken from this, that you think, there might be some Vermont specific things here, but there's a lot that you could take anywhere and build on it?
I love the question, because my dream is that we can accelerate this support for children and families that we know is critical, to really keeping up with our society in the 21st century here. We just have not kept up with this massive infrastructure need. And I just see it as such an opportunity. I mean, you can tell probably in how I talk about this, I believe this is the greatest opportunity before us to have a profound impact on breaking generational cycles, giving kids what they need to thrive over a lifetime, everything from academics, but to health, to executive function, and actually, propensity for or against addictive behaviors and chronic health issues. That's what we're talking about when you actually do this for our kids, not to mention the immediate workforce development, and sort of, putting women back in the workforce in jobs they've trained to be in and want to be in, right? So profound what we can do here. So our hope is that we can absolutely accelerate this effort, because truthfully, systems transformation is hard work. It takes the focus, it takes the patience, it takes the just persistence. And I hope we can accelerate that, because we can prove a model. Lessons learned, that worked and that didn't. For example, right, urgency and accountability. As I mentioned, we put a deadline on our work, right? We said high quality affordable childcare by 2025, 10 years, let's do this. That kept focus, and it kept our entrepreneurial spirit. Are we on track? Great. Are we on track to win by 2025? No. Then what do we need to do differently? And then our external partners had accountability based around that. So a deadline, a focus, don't lose your faith, keep your eye on the prize, keep renewing stuff around that collective goal. So that's huge. Grassroots mobilization, any demographic, any state, grassroots mobilization is critical. When you're having this level of systems transformation, you can't look back and see that you've left everyone behind. You have to move it together as a community, or it will not be effective. It won't work for your context. But grassroots mobilization is what makes it happen. That's what brings the coalition together, the political and public will that's necessary. And it's what makes the implementation work too, which is, right, so often people sign the bill and say, mission accomplished, I'm out of here. Nope. Implementation is what matters for the outcomes. And so that's so important to do that organizing, good old fashioned organizing. And the last thing I would say probably is, don't be afraid of politics. I'm sorry, if you're changing the law, if you're changing policy, there's a political system that you must move through. These lawmakers were candidates once. And so, we use the election cycle when people were really paying attention to elevate the issue of childcare, which is so often overlooked for the opportunity that it truly is, especially for our economy. We elevated this issue. We got folks to understand their constituents are demanding access to quality childcare. It is critical. It's a crisis. And they couldn't go home empty-handed. Once they heard from their constituents, from their community members, that this is what we need and what they need. So I would just say politics, urgency, accountability, elevate the voices of those most affected, especially early educators, parents, learn from them, put them in the driver's seat, right? And that grassroots mobilization supports all that. So, and again, you already heard me say, but worth mentioning, businesses must not just be a part of this. They must be at the front. They must be leading, because a big part of this is a return on investment value proposition that includes upfront capital. That's what's going to make it work, and it will pay for itself. And so I guess to close on that one, Aaron, we hopefully, whether we're Vermont, we're small, and you think, cows or Ben and Jerry's or whatever it might be, that's fine. But we have a lot of transferable lessons, especially, when it comes to, honestly, our divided politics, Republican governor, Democratic legislature, we're able to get this done. And we did it. And guess what? The sky didn't fall. In fact, quite the opposite. We're seeing, workforce development gains. We're seeing, parents be able to afford childcare. We're seeing increased access and affordability in childcare. So that should be hopefully a helpful accelerant to other places.
Incredibly helpful. Aly Richards, Let's Grow Kids Vermont, thank you so much for joining us on June 27th at the National Child Care Innovation Summit. And thank you 1,000 times for joining us again here on continuing the conversation. Appreciate it, Aly.
My pleasure. My absolute pleasure. Thank you.